We're delighted today to be joined by 4 current fellowship holders from a range of disciplines. Our 4 speakers, who I'll introduce in just a minute, are going to help us to think about fellowships by sharing their experience in applying for and obtaining fellowships. So just to give a little bit of context, this session is part of a series of events and resources called Focus on Fellowships. It's an annual series for Cambridge postdocs and PhDs who are looking at pursuing fellowships as their next stage in their academic career. So there's lots of opportunities that a fellowship can provide. And one of the most important things is that if you're selected and successful in getting one, it's how you can enhance your career and your journey, perhaps into academia. They give you that time and the resources to pursue your research and build a reputation in your field. So this panel discussion is the first of our live sessions as part of this Focus on Fellowships. Our next is on, we have something coming up on Thursday and our next on Monday, but we'll tell you just a bit more about those at the end. But before I ask the panelists to start introducing themselves, I'll just briefly outline how we're going to run today. So we're just going to start first with some introductions from the panelists, telling us about their career path from their PhD to the fellowship that they're currently holding. And then we'll move on to ask them about some questions on how they developed their ideas for the fellowships. We're going to ask them about how much time it's taken them and how they planned for that, as well as to share how to manage a fellowship and then thinking through what happens next. So we'll have sort of a guided discussion in that part. And then finally, we're going to ask them for their top tip for those thinking of applying. So those things you'll hear from the speakers, and then we're going to give you a chance at the end to ask some questions. And we are really conscious that everyone is coming from different backgrounds, different circumstances, and probably thinking about quite a range of different schemes. So we won't be using this as a forum to answer very specific individual circumstances, but really thinking more broadly about fellowships and how to apply for them. So now on to our panelists, who have very generously agreed to be with us today and are going to help us with this focus on fellowships. I'm going to hand over to them now to introduce themselves in more detail. So if it's okay with you, Julieta, can I start with you? We've got Julieta first who's got a Wellcome Trust, early career fellowship in the Department of Sociology. Ian, who is a Royal Society University Research Fellow in the Department of Physics. Alecia-Jane, who's a UKRI Future Leaders Fellow in the Departments of Pharmacology and Biochemistry, and Emmanuela, who's a Leverhulme Early Career Fellow in the Faculty of Music. So welcome to them. If it's okay then, Julieta, we'll start with you just to give a short introduction, telling us about your career path from PhD to fellowship.
Hello, everyone. I want to start by thanking Diane and her team for inviting me today. So to start, a little bit of an overview of the trajectory between finishing my PhD and the fellowship. I have to say that I finished my PhD in the middle of the pandemic, so that was 2020. And I was lucky enough that I got an offer from the Department of Sociology for a 2-year lectureship. So I was finishing with one hand and then preparing for the start of this lectureship. That was in the Department of Sociology, as I said. So the first year of that position was mostly about teaching. I had to organize courses for undergraduates. I also had to deliver courses, methodology modules for PhD and master students. So a lot of that work really took over my whole time. So I didn't really have much time to think about a project. And it was when I started the second year of this position that a few of my colleagues in the research group that I was in and the PI of this team also brought to my attention the existence of these different fellowships for early career researchers. I have to say that I didn't obtain my PhD in the UK. I got my PhD in the US, so I was not familiar with the UK context. So it was really key to have people that could provide information on these multiple schemes. And then I looked into them and I figured out which ones were the most appropriate for me. So the second year, it was slightly easier. I already had built a lot of the teaching material, so I had more time to develop these ideas. And I had a project, and I think we'll talk about it in more detail later, but I had this idea for this project that I developed a while ago. It was something that I had, and then this gave me the time to start developing the project itself. So I started with, so I decided to apply for the three main ones, the British Academy, Leverhulme, and then the Wellcome. And the first one was the British Academy, and I think that was the kind of like the early draft of this proposal. I got rejected from them, so I didn't get through. And then I applied for Leverhulme, and that was a reworking of that initial proposal that I wrote for British Academy. And then finally, I applied for Wellcome. And this is to say that it's a process that takes multiple iterations. You go through different cycles of feedback, revisions, and it's fine to not get it at the first time. You'll probably get other chances to rework your thoughts and your project, and then you might be able to secure a fellowship. So that was my career. And then after, it was the third application that was the successful one, and I ended up getting the Wellcome Trust Early Career Fellowship.
Great, thank you. Thanks a lot, Julieta. Let's move over to you then, Ian.
Hi, so my name is Ian Jacobs. I'm in the Department of Physics. And again, thank you for the invitation to speak here. So I did my PhD in the United States. I'm from the US at the University of California, Davis. And originally, when sort of exploring postdoc options, had just cold emailed a number of professors, including a professor here at Cambridge. And he invited me to come give a lecture and then apply for a fellowship, the Newton International Fellowship through the Royal Society, which I ended up getting. So that's what brought me here to Cambridge in the first place. And so I had that fellowship for 2 years. And towards the end of that fellowship, I was kind of debating what to do next. My wife was kind of thinking maybe she wanted to move back to the US, but my project wasn't really finished, so we decided to stay another year. And in that year, my wife kind of did a full 180 and she said, okay, I would like to stay here. So then I started investigating options of how, what funding there would be to stay. And my PI at the time suggested the URF was a very good fellowship. It's what he had also when he started his career here in Cambridge. And so he suggested that I apply. So I applied first in 2021 and I think didn't really spend enough time getting a lot of sort of people's views on the proposal. It kind of came together last minute and didn't make it even to the first round of, first cut basically. So in the second time through in 2022, I really took my time and got a lot of feedback on the proposal before submitting it, and then that luckily made it. In terms of the ideas for the fellowship, the basic concept, that sort of area that I wanted to work in was something I had been thinking about since back in my PhD, but I wanted to sort of mesh this with the field that I'm in currently and see if there was some way I could combine sort of aspects of each of these together into a new area. I think in general, this is probably a good approach for at least STEM fields, is trying to knit two fields together in an unexpected or unusual way. And so I had some friends from my PhD that worked in the other field that I got some feedback from. I proposed also my ideas in a group meeting and got some feedback from group members, and then eventually sort of coalesced on sort of a concrete idea that we could try. And so it really, I think, took a long time to refine the ideas. I would say a year or more from the point of deciding that I was going to apply for this to the point where it's like I had a concrete idea of like, this is the thing that I would like to apply for. So yeah.
That's great. We'll touch on some of those other questions later, but thanks for that. I can already see some of the themes coming through in terms of that sort of getting to that fellowship stage. Alecia-Jane, Would you like to introduce your pathway?
Of course, lovely to be here. Thanks for the invitation. So to start off, I did my PhD at the University of Western Australia in Australia. I'm Australian. And I had a bit of a bumpy time. So I decided that I really wanted to go to a group where I could learn some, really exciting new techniques, but also wanted to move to Europe because I thought that would be a lot of fun. And so I went to some European conferences and met an amazing researcher who I approached, and I said, look, I'd really love to do a postdoc in your group. And she actually invited me for a visit, and she said, look, it'd be really great if you could apply for some funding to come over. So I moved to Munich in Germany at the Helmholtz Center after applying for about 4 or 5 different fellowships, and I got one. So I had enough funding to move over for a year. And then I actually subsequently took on the process of writing another application, which was Helmholtz specific, and I got funding for a further 3 years. So that was a fantastic kind of beginning where I felt like I was really in the field that I was really excited about, in a location and learning new things. And it was a little bit of a serendipitous moment when I moved to Cambridge. So what happened was I had already been talking with someone here, Wally Khaled, at the Department of Pharmacology, and I was really interested to learn a new technique, single cell RNA sequencing. So he invited me to come over to Cambridge, and I then followed that up with about a 3 or 4 year postdoc here as well. And I remember when I was filling out the applications during my first postdoc to try and get funding, my group leader at the time, I said, I don't know what I should write as what I want to do in the future. And she said, just write you want to be a group leader. And I said, I can't be a group leader. What are you talking about? And she said, of course you can. Are you crazy? So I actually wrote that down, and I hadn't really thought about it before then. But kind of since that point onwards, I thought that's actually something I'd really love to do. So when I moved to Cambridge, I talked to my new supervisor. I did say that this is something I want to work towards. He was very supportive. He helped me kind of finish up the projects from Germany, gave me exposure to a completely different set of research. And I kind of went into a different field for a little bit, which I thought would be a bit destructive towards my career path, but actually it turned out to be the opposite. It gave me a completely different set of collaborations, a completely new skill set. And then, as Ian mentioned, merging that with my expertise in the field back from Australia and Germany, I think that really kind of painted a really colourful kind of research program, which was super novel. So like Julieta mentioned, I did multiple rounds, and I think that's something everyone has to brace themselves for. I thought I'd be the exception to the rule, that I'd just be magical and just do the perfect first application. And it's just not the case. I mean, each time you learn something new, you get more feedback, and you work yourself towards kind of a completely new proposal. And I think when I put my application for the UKRI Future Leaders Fellowship, I was really proud of it because I worked super hard with feedback from 4 other fellowships that I had been rejected from. So that was actually a great thing for me. Yeah, and so now I'm here in biochemistry.
Yeah, that's great. Really interesting. As I can say, there's lots of themes already coming through. Emmanuela, would you like to just introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Diane. I just want to reiterate what my co-panelists have said, and thank you for inviting me to speak here today. So I'm Emmanuela Wroth. I'm a Leverhulme Early Career Fellow in the Faculty of Music. And I thought I'd actually start from my undergraduate training, given that I've got a slightly unusual pathway. So I did my undergraduate and MPhil here in Cambridge in the Modern and Medieval Languages Department. And then actually for my PhD, I moved across into music, and I did a collaborative doctoral project between Durham University and the Bose Museum between 2018 to 2022, so also a pandemic PhD. So during this time, I really tried to keep a foothold between both music and French, both as an interdisciplinary scholar, but also to try and maximize my sort of employability in the future. So this involved sort of teaching in the French department and presenting in colloquia in both music and French. I also did the AFHEA teaching qualification, so to become Associate Fellow of the Higher Education Academy while doing the teaching, which I would recommend doing if it's available to you. And then on completion of my PhD, I was really lucky to be awarded a 2-year postdoctoral position in French music at the University of Toronto in Canada between 2022 and 24. The position was looking very specifically for someone to work on 19th century French theatre, ideally women, which was what my PhD was on. So this is an example of how I think success in research is always a question of timing and luck as well as hard work. So yes, I worked hard during my PhD and did teaching and publications, but the perfect funding opportunity came up that was so suited to me. So, you know, if you're not as fortunate immediately in having that sort of, it doesn't mean you're any less, you know, valuable or you don't have the same potential, but just a reminder that luck does also play a role in these things. And I also want to highlight, like some of my co-panelists have, that this was my only successful application and I had many, many rejections, including all the junior research fellowships at Oxbridge and several other teaching and research jobs, but it just takes one successful application. And it was a great opportunity for me to develop my international profile and also get a much needed change of scenery after my pandemic PhD. And so during this 2-year postdoc in Toronto, I prioritized getting my PhD book proposal written and sent to publishers, and I was successful in getting a contract with Oxford University Press. And I think this was a key development to then securing my current Leverhulme Early Career Fellowship at Cambridge, given how important a monograph is in my field, so in music and modern languages. That's obviously not true to all fields. So, you know, I'm being specific in this advice, being sort of in these fields. And then alongside this book contract, I also maximized being in North America and attending many conferences out there to maximize the distribution of my work, but also grow my international network. And this resulted in several publication opportunities, including being invited to write a book chapter and a review. And this also doubtlessly contributed to my fellowship success. In addition to the book and networking and publications, I also designed and taught my own undergraduate course in the music faculty, which again helped me to develop my teaching profile. And through this first postdoc, I also made sure to carve out time, like I had with my PhD, to develop my research and project so as for it to become suitable for a fellowship, which in my case included broadening out my focus into a more ambitious time frame, so historical time period, but also geographical area. And I applied for all the major fellowships, including the Marie Curie, British Academy, Leverhulme, Irish Research Council, again, all the junior research fellowships I was still eligible for. And this included a number of successful applications, more successful than the first time round. I think it's true that as you develop, you become more attractive, but again, many, many rejections as well, just to reiterate that point. And yet now, I'm now a Leverhulme Early Career Fellow. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. That's really interesting. And yeah, I think you probably all will see that one of the main themes coming through already is just that number of applications and sort of the different iterations that goes through, you know, as well as but it only takes one, as they say, and you know, all that feedback that you're getting as well. Julieta, is there anything else you'd like to say just about the sort of coming up with the ideas for the fellowship and developing, you know, did that just evolve from your previous work, or how did you go about that? I mean, I know you said there was just even getting that time to think was a challenge in that when you were teaching, but are there other things that you could say about developing the ideas?
Sure. So as I said, I mentioned briefly that the idea that I ended up developing for this project came when I was doing my PhD. So just to clarify, I'm an anthropologist, so I do fieldwork-based research. And I was researching on reproductive violence in Peru, looking at a historical case of forced sterilization that had happened in the 90s. And at the time when I was interviewing people, survivors of this program, I was also in a place where mining is the largest economic sector of the region, and a lot of peasant communities talk about it, like risks of exposure to toxicants or all sorts of things. And so this gave me the idea of this project, and I remember writing it down in my diary, and then I decided to open a file where I have research ideas, and I just put thoughts there. And I think this is a good idea to just have somewhere where you can record these thoughts and ideas that then later on can become a research project or a broader research thing. And then I was very lucky because in the group that I joined, there was a researcher that did some research on reproduction and environment, which was a direction that my research was taking. So I was very lucky that I had someone that I could think with and develop these thoughts. Yeah. And it was really essential for this project. And then I started writing after that first year. Then it was just writing these ideas, doing some reading and developing this. And then I started getting feedback from colleagues, from different people, from my PI, from my colleagues, even from someone from grant support in sociology. Mm-hmm. She also helped with that. So it's just that moment where you feel a bit comfortable with sharing that, knowing that this is just some initial thinking and that ideas still need to be developed, but you can benefit a lot from that. And it can be quite scary. We want to show that we know everything. And a lot of this is just exploratory, really. So my advice is really to be open and just share it with people that you feel comfortable with, that you feel can make an important contribution to your thinking and the developing of your ideas. And that was basically it. So it was grounded in so to summarize, it was grounded in my PhD research. And I also tried to, and I think this is very important when you write a proposal, it's not just about the proposal, it's really about a broader research vision. So I think there's an important kind of like thinking through is how you put together these different pieces of the puzzle to create a convincing story about who you are as a researcher and what you can bring and contribute to an academic community. So that piece of the story was also something that took me a while to figure out how these two pieces kind of like fit together. But in the end, I think that's what make my application strong.
That's really interesting. Yeah, just pulling that together in terms of this idea of a research vision. And so like how you say thinking with others and to develop those ideas and starting to test them out as well. Ian, you were mentioning this, I love the term of knitting different things together. Is there anything you want to say is further on like how you then took that into developing your fellowship ideas?
Yeah, so I mean, as I said, the ideas, the sort of big picture ideas of what I wanted to do were things that I had been thinking about for a long time. But generally speaking, there's this sort of emerging field called radiative cooling materials that I was very interested in. And I was just trying to figure out how I could do something in this field using the sort of materials that I work with. And eventually realized that there was something interesting that I could do there. But it was very speculative initially. And so I at my postdoc research group, at a group meeting, I just presented this idea as like, what do you guys think about this, basically? And my PI was like, that is a very cool idea. Do you want a grad student to work on this? So he had a starting PhD student that he basically let me supervise on this project.
Oh,
and from that, we were able to get some very initial results that seemed to suggest that this idea would work, that we could put into the proposal. And I think that was really very important for the success, because the first time around I applied for it, we didn't have good results yet. It was just sort of some basic arguments based on the spectra of the materials. And I think it maybe was not all that convincing in retrospect, but having sort of the preliminary data suggesting like, no, this really should work, I think was very important. So yeah, I guess that's.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, especially also that kind of spotting a new area and trying to sort of explore initially to see how your current expertise fit in that new area. I think that's really interesting.
And that part I think took several years to figure out. And I mean, I guess the other thing I want to add is like, I had been thinking about this for a long time and thought it was a little bit too out there to even sort of suggest. And I think in retrospect, I wish I had been a little bit more ambitious about trying this earlier, because in the intervening years, actually, this has become a sort of large area. So it's like,
Right.
it would have, I think, been, it would have been beneficial to have gotten in a little bit earlier, but it's still.
But you're there now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's all hindsight, all this hindsight stuff, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
What about you, Alecia-Jane? I really like this idea of trying, bringing in new techniques and meeting people, and that's what. Do you have anything else to say about sort of how you went through that process of putting your ideas together?
Yeah, I think when I started out, I kind of had a broad picture idea of the sorts of questions I wanted to answer in my research program. So
Yeah.
I think realizing what your passion topic is, I think is really important, and just knowing where you want to make a difference, I think is a good starting point. I think after that, chatting with a lot of people obviously is really important, but something I found really useful was looking at applications for grant funding and fellowships from my mentors, but also over the course of this fellowship application. And one thing I think that made a huge difference in this particular one I did was I actually reached out to other people who'd received the same fellowship. And I saw how they projected their vision and how they sold themselves, not just on what they could practically do within the time frame, but what them and a team could do, because my particular fellowship allows for funding for other people. And that was huge. So I think part of it it comes iteratively through writing multiple proposals, but also I think equally important is also reading lots of proposals where you can, because I think that's where you really understand the scope of what you can actually achieve when you're given the sorts of resources that these fellowships come with.
Yeah. So taking full advantage of all the environment that you're going to be in, I guess, in many ways, and showing that. Emmanuela, how about you for thinking about the ideas? You've touched on that a little bit. Is there anything else you'd like to add on that?
Yeah, thanks. So I'd say, without wanting to sound too cliche, that a good word here is organic. So like my ideas develop very organically, following kind of my interests as I develop my research. I'm sure most of you will be familiar with the idea that as your PhD research goes along, it expands, and there's all these other questions that it brings up, and that can feel a bit overwhelming. But what I would say is when there's certain ideas that you're interested in, but it feels too big for the scope, like create a separate folder and document and sort of put those ideas there for future projects. And that's what happened with me during my PhD and then my first postdoc as well. So my PhD was an intersectional analysis through sort of gender, sexuality and class politics of 19th century women performers in France. And during this research, I came across some really interesting racialized singers who I wanted to include in the project. But as it got bigger and bigger, I sort of felt like this question of race and racialized performance actually deserved its own project. So instead of sort of trying to fit them all into one project, I sort of decided to save those for a future project. So then my first postdoc in Toronto was looking at this question of race and racialized performance in 19th century France, on top of the kind of gender and class politics, adding a kind of extra lens, so to speak. And then as I was doing that, as I mentioned a bit before, I started discovering, other women performers that were racialized, but not in 19th century Paris, in 18th century Italy, and so that's how the project then expanded into a more ambitious sort of time frame into the 18th century as well as 19th, and also into Italy and as well as France and Spain. And I think, I was able to use my languages in quite an organic way as well. Oh, well, I can now use my Italian or my Spanish to follow these stories, and it sort of expands naturally, based both on my interests but also my expertise. And I think that really comes across. I'll talk about that a bit more later, but I think this idea of following your interest, because you're only really going to be as good as you are interested in a project, I think. Yeah. But while also keeping an idea of what is fundable, what is I was already interested in questions of race before 2020 and George Floyd, and suddenly funders thinking that these topics were important, but it just came at a time where I was working on this, and that became sort of, so having an awareness of these trends as well. I don't want to sound too sort of skeptical, but being aware of what is fundable, but also, yeah, following your own nose in terms of interests.
Yeah, I like that idea, organic. So you're really paying attention to those things that are coming up that may not fit the scope of what you're doing at the moment, and pulling that all together in the context of everything else that's happening. That's really interesting. We're going to move now just a little bit more into sort of some of the realities of the application process and sort of how much time that takes to put together, how you plan for it, while you're trying to do your existing workload. Alecia-Jane, do you want to maybe start with that and tell us a bit about how you manage that?
Sure. So I think I planned on applying, first of all, November 2021. I think it was a Wellcome CDA. And actually, after a bit of advice from a few different people, I was recommended to just hold off till the next round. So I decided last minute not to put that in. And then I put kind of 2 back-to-back after that in, I think, May, April of 2022. And so I think to really get my application kind of started and mature, I would say for sure at least a month. But the reality of the situation is that, you do have to reach out to your accounts department, your grants management. If you want letters of recommendation, I would say you need at least a month for that. And then if you do want to approach people for advice, you want at least a month out. So I would say give yourself at least 2 months for your first application. In reality, I submitted my kind of winning grant in December 2022. So that's at least a full year of applications with multiple in between. And I was kind of gearing up for multiple rounds of each of those as well. So if you have a contract at the moment, I think it's always good to think a year in advance, because sometimes it takes also 6 months to a year to actually get awarded the fellowship as well, which in my case, I got my fellowship mid last year, and that was after applying, December 2022.
Yeah, and you were already in the context of where you were going to do the fellowship as well, weren't you?
Exactly.
Yeah. So there's that piece of time. How about you, Ian? Did you have anything to add on that?
Sorry, no, I think 2 months feels about right. Maybe even longer. I feel like the first time I applied, so I applied for the URF in 2021 and 2022. The first time I applied, I think I gave myself maybe a month, and that was not enough time. So I kind of got to the down near the deadline. I had taken care of all of the sort of the funding stuff with the budgeting with the department and everything. But getting the actual proposal sort of formalized and finished, that kind of got left to the last minute. And I think I didn't get enough feedback from other people, and it was not ideally formatted. I think it didn't lay out a broad enough vision, and I mean, when I then showed it to some people the next time around as a basis for the application in 2022, people said, the ideas are good. It's just, it's not formatted right. So the second time around, I gave myself, I think, probably 3 months. I think I started in June and it's due in September, where I was focusing most of my time just on that application. And I feel like that felt then doable, but I would say give yourself plenty of time, start working on it early, and just chip away at it a little bit every day, rather than sort of leaving it to the end.
Yeah, the more time, the better, I guess. What about you, Emmanuela? Anything on that as well? Were there any internal deadlines as well that you had to take into consideration out of interest?
Yeah, I would echo again my co-panelists about chipping away and just doing it gradually over the year or whatnot, rather than leaving it all as one project. In my case, what I did and what I'd recommend doing is having an Excel spreadsheet in which you put in all the application deadlines, and also things like how many references you need, at what point they need to be sent, what documents you need, what word counts, and you can highlight ones that actually require similar things and realize that actually they're asking for a similar thing, and then put these deadlines in your diary. and just ensure that you have time to apply for these alongside other work commitments. You just treat them like another deadline. And again, you know, as we've all been discussing, this kind of gradual development of your research, like it kind of happens alongside. So rather than seeing it as a separate thing you have to do, kind of incorporating it into your research and your teaching. And many applications are very formulaic and repetitive. So once you've got your research statement, CV and references kind of ready, then it's fairly quick to rework these. So yeah, I would echo my colleagues in saying, you know, you want to spend a good few months. I'd say, yeah, 2 or 3 months. Certainly for my fellowship, I spent refining it and really developing it over the summer. But then once that was done, and once I'd got feedback from peers and had other people comment on it, it was then quite quick to fire out the various fellowships, because I'd kind of done fellowship applications because I'd done the bulk of that work. So while I would recommend spending a decent amount of time on the project to begin with and sending it off, once you're happy with it, then I would try and not spend too much time on refining it each time, but just kind of, once you're happy with it, just kind of get that going. And that it's very much a numbers game. So, you know, the more you apply for, just get your hat in the ring and apply for as many as possible. But then I'll also kind of caution that with saying be realistic about which ones you apply to. So don't waste your time and energy, but also limited opportunities on applying for ones that you are not ready yet for, or that they're not suited for you. So an example of that is, for example, the British Academy, that you only get one chance to apply for it. So I know people who've sort of just applied for that immediately out of their PhD and then been unsuccessful, and then they've lost that chance. So be really realistic with kind of where you're at in your academic stage and what things you're more likely to get. And you can ask for advice about this, but as a sort of, what I was told was that bigger fellowships like the British Academy, Leverhulme, Marie Curie, you're probably more likely to be successful either as a second postdoc or 1 or 2 years out of your PhD when you've had time to teach and develop your research profile. That's not to say that people don't walk straight out of PhDs with them, so don't let me stop you if you think you're ready. But these bigger fellowships often expect a certain publication record, and that is hard to do while also doing a PhD. But that's not to say that there aren't other fellowships like the JRFs, the Junior Research Fellowships, and I don't know, maybe the Irish Research Council, that I think people are maybe more likely to get straight out of PhD. So just about being a bit more also sort of strategic about which ones you put your energy and time into. That said, Leverhulme doesn't, I think you can apply as many times as you want. So there's no harm in throwing an application in, you know, while you're still doing the PhD. Just be careful to check those kind of things so that you don't, I think again, Marie Curie, unless you get certain points in your first application, you're prevented from reapplying. So again, you know, I caution that apply for everything with, be careful not to waste opportunities if you're not quite ready yet.
I think you're highlighting something really, in terms of really being clear on the eligibility requirements, because they will range and vary, won't they? So it's that kind of, that part of the process as well, is really being attuned to that. Is there anything else from you, Julieta, in terms of thinking about that application process?
Let me think. Yeah, so I think all my co-panelists already said it, but just the question of the budget, I think it has to be taken into consideration in the process, because a lot of the time we just focus on the text itself, and then it's like, oh, and disclaimer, I'm a social scientist, so I'm not the best with numbers or budgeting things. So it was a bit of a challenge for me. But luckily, I got support from the finance department in the Faculty of Department of Sociology. So they helped me with that. But I have to say, especially with Wellcome, because that is a quite generous fellowship. So you get your salary, and then on top of that, you get up to 400K for research costs. So that's quite a lot of money for social sciences, especially. So you can get a lot of things. And I think I didn't do my job to figure out all sorts of things that I could put in the budget. And then later on, I regretted that I didn't take the time to do this. So in retrospect, I do advise people to think about it in advance, especially once you have the research project. Make sure that everything that you promised in the project has corresponding budget item, because then you say, okay, I'm going to present this in, I don't know, conferences, or I'm going to do a workshop with stakeholders, then you need to budget that money there. So be mindful that you need to have kind of like harmony between what you describe in the project and the budget as well. And then from something that Emmanuela said, sometimes there is important to be aware that the eligibility criteria changes a lot. So for example, some fellowships only allow you after 1 year of PhD up to 4 years, or Marie Curie has a longer window period for applying. So you can apply, I don't know, after your 3rd year or 4th year, and probably at that time you would be more successful because you have built a little bit of your early career with some teaching or other postdocs. So it really depends on it. But the British Academy, I made that mistake. I applied, that was my first application, and then I basically ruined my chances to apply again. Because I didn't make it through the cut to be reinvited for an application on the following year. So yeah, it's important to figure out the eligibility criteria and window periods for applying after PhD. Yeah, that's all.
Great. Yeah, a lot of it's coming back to thinking about, well, having a spreadsheet is a great idea for all of these things to keep track of, isn't it? And the time that it takes to figure all that out and to be talking to people. It's really strong themes. I'm going to jump now to just asking you about your top tips before we move into the last bit, opening to the questions from our participants. So maybe starting with you, Ian, if you could give one piece of advice to someone who's considering applying for fellowships, what would that be?
I would say get as much feedback from senior mentors as possible. So talk to as many different professors or senior people who have older people who have gotten these same fellowships before as possible, to get a sense for like what really you need to have in order to get these, what you need to demonstrate in your proposal, and what what is important and what is not. Because I think for me, going into at least the first round of fellowships, I mean, the first year that my PI had suggested that I apply for this, I was like, I don't think I have enough. I don't think my CV is good enough yet. But really, in retrospect, I should have trusted his judgment on this, because he has sat on the panel that decides who gets these before. Like he would obviously know. So yeah, I guess in short, just get as much feedback, both get as much advice as to which fellowships to apply to, and as much feedback on your ideas and your proposal as possible.
Great. Yeah, that's really helpful. Thanks, Ian. How about you, Emmanuel? A top tip for those applying for fellowships?
Thanks, Diane. I think key to success is having a good and credible research narrative. So this means being able to demonstrate 3 things, which is why this project, and why the research institute at which you propose the research. If you're able to convincingly demonstrate how all of these 3 aspects work together, you stand a decent chance. So you have to basically convince a funder that you are the best person for this project, that the project you propose is essential, but also that the host institution, so whether that's the research community or its facilities, or probably both, is the best place to do it. And the best bit of advice I think I was given for my fellowship research project was not just to tell the funders why the project is important, but actually what they risk for the field or for academic excellence if they don't fund your research. So you're basically telling them that there's a problem, a lack of research, but not to worry, that you're here to resolve the problem for them. Lucky them. And so that your very specific expertise make you the best person for this job. Of course, you don't want to come across as arrogant, but also I think you shouldn't be scared to be confident about your academic credential and experience, which you doubtlessly have at this point.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, I really like that. That is very specific expertise that you have, and that's what you're demonstrating, isn't it? That you've got a very specific offer. And how about you, Julieta? Did you have a top tip that you'd like to share? Something you'd wish you'd known?
More than something I don't know, I think is just be brave. and just put your ideas out there. I think that's what really matters the most. It can be quite scary because, as I think a lot of us have already said it, we were trying to open new lines of research or areas or bring in fields that do not necessarily speak to each other. And sometimes that can be a vulnerable place to be when you're a junior researcher, and then you have to show that, you know, that you have an expertise, and yet you are really creating something different. So just be courageous. Don't be afraid of getting feedback and exposing yourself to that. And yeah, start early. I think that's the best piece of advice, really. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. And how about you, Alecia-Jane?
Yeah, I think we've discussed a little bit about resilience kind of and keep applying. I was watching this, I think it was an interview with Seth Rogen, and he was saying, look, in Hollywood, all the people that you see up here in the movies and things like that, maybe are not necessarily the most talented, but they're the ones who always showed up to the auditions. So I feel like you just have to remember that, you know, if you keep going, I really do believe that you can get it. It's just, you know, making sure that you have taken advice from other people. If they believe in you, you need to believe in yourself, and you just have to keep going. So I think the resilience is really important. I'll just give a very quick second tip, and that's definitely, again, just to reiterate, contacting previous recipients, because I contacted about 4 or 5, cold called them, looked on the list basically of published people, not from this place, so not from Cambridge, but elsewhere. And I basically said, can you give me your top tips? And that was really helpful, as well as obviously once you've had a conversation with them, then they're more likely to be happy to pass you their application. So it kind of is a twofold thing. So yeah, that's me.
That's great. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's really, really helpful advice, all of that. Thank you. We've got lots and lots of questions coming in. We're going to move quickly into those to see if we can get through as many as we can. The first one we're going to pick up is if any of the panelists had experience of being jobless while applying for these fellowships, given that long time frame of the applications and the short length of postdoc contracts. Does anybody want to take that on? Go for it, Alecia-Jane.
Okay, so I can't say I was jobless, but I always had that fear of being jobless constantly. So I have to say, I think that fear really helped push me. So I think, yeah, it was always just trying to like fit it in around the weekends and things like that, as well as kind of doing the postdoc at the same time. So yeah, might not be exactly the right answer.
Yeah, I think it was, yeah, well, that because I think it was Emmanuela who said integrating it alongside what you're doing, almost as part of what you're doing in that space of time, because the deadlines are really challenging, which takes us back to that applying early part. How important would you say are the number of publications for obtaining a fellowship? Anybody want to take that? Emmanuela.
I think sadly the publish or perish thing does apply, but I think, you know, there's a thing about academic age or stage. So there's an awareness of how long you've been working compared to how much you should be able to produce. So I think for me, with my first postdoc, coming out with a PhD, I had sort of one, again, specific to my field, so I'm talking about music and French. I had a journal article that was accepted in a top journal. It wasn't out yet, but I think having at least one sort of peer-reviewed article in a good journal is really, really good. And then I also had a chapter in a book that was agreed to. So again, I didn't have anything apart from a book review. I think I had one book review published, but other than that, I had a couple of publications that were accepted, even if not out yet. And I will say that actually the person who gave me the postdoc in Toronto did say the book review was great to be able to see that I was able to write. So, you know, something like that might seem like a small publication, but it can go a long way to showing. And then as for the second, so the Leverhulme, the fellowship that I have now, as I said before, in my field, I did have the monograph contract. Again, to reiterate, not published. Like I'm still working on the book writing now, but it's about having those lines on the CV. I think getting an accepted article or book review or whatever it is versus actually having it out is definitely key. And then again, saying yes to having a combination of articles, book reviews, chapters in books as you progress. But there's an awareness of how long you've been there, I think.
Yeah, great. Thanks. How about you, Ian?
Yeah, so I mean, this will obviously be very field dependent, and so I mean, you definitely need to have some publications in my field at least, but I think there can be a very big difference between how many you need for a successful application. If you only have a couple publications, but those are really very groundbreaking ideas, then you can still absolutely be successful. And I've seen people in physics with these sorts of CVs. At the same time, you can also just have lots of publications and be unsuccessful. So I think it is helpful. It's not probably the most important thing. I think having strong reference letters and a compelling project idea are all probably equally or more important.
Great, thanks very much. That's really helpful. I'm going to pick up this one here because we didn't talk too much about sort of the host and just making contact with host. Has any of you approached institutes out of your current workplace to submit applications, and any advice on doing that particularly? Alecia-Jane, I know you met people at conferences, didn't you? And were quite proactive in that way. Did you want to pick that up?
Yeah, I can say specifically for the UKRI Future Leaders Fellowship, what's kind of interesting is that I actually did transition after I got my funding. So something I didn't quite expect to do is to actually start afterwards, knowing that I can move my fellowship if I want to. And so I had a much better idea of the sorts of space and resources I required. And I think that's something you should start thinking about, is realistically, can where you are currently actually support everything you need? And if not, is there an alternative location that might be able to tick off those boxes? You can always do a joint. So right now I'm joint between biochemistry and pharmacology. And I think that is very beneficial in some ways. It can also have some drawbacks. But I do think that it's very hard to imagine yourself in a different space, but it's something that if you think about it objectively, what do I need to do this successfully? And then has my current place got this? I think, and then if the answer is yes, fantastic, you can kind of go through that way. Otherwise, approach other places. I know each department around Cambridge does things slightly differently. When I applied for my fellowship, I just had like a very quick, casual conversation with my head of department. Whereas I have seen much more structured kind of interview processes where people have to kind of compete to be allowed to actually kind of put an application in through their department. So it is worth kind of discussing with other group leaders that you might have in your department what the process looks like, and also just think kind of bigger picture, how are you going to be successful? What's going to help you be successful in your research program?
Great, thank you very much. I know, Ian, you said you cold emailed, I think you mentioned, when you were coming from California to the UK. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so I mean, this was for my initial fellowship application, the Newton Fellowship. But yeah, I mean, I just I read lots of papers in my field and had a sense of what groups were doing, I think, interesting work that I would want to do a postdoc in, and so I just basically sent out emails with my CV and maybe a couple sentences, not so long that they're not going to read it.
Yeah.
Sort of message. And to 3 or 4 professors that I wanted to do a postdoc with. And I think half of them didn't email me back. The one from Cambridge, who I ended up working with, I didn't get a response from him for like 2.5 months, I think. So like, these people are very busy, so be patient. But I think it can't hurt. And particularly if you work in an area that is something that's important to their research group's current activities, then I think that can be very important. It can be easy to see how your expertise can sort of play into the success of their current groups or current research.
So doing that research in advance and understanding that. So we have got quite a few questions now. We've touched on this a bit, really, about this. How do you actually navigate doing all this when you have a full-time job, and you have so many applications that you need to be applying for? And then maybe also peripheral to that, if somebody can speak to this, is if your PI might think that your application prep would take you away from projects that they want you to work on if it's not aligned with what they're doing. Does anybody have anything on that? Either the how do you do this along the full-time job? I've got Alecia and Ian and Julia. Why don't we start with you, Julieta, and then I think everybody's got something on this. Julieta.
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge that it's quite a challenge if you have a job in social sciences. I mean, we teach a lot, and that's part of is the bread and butter of this. So you have to be able to carve a space in the midst of that. But also, if you get a teaching position straight out of PhD, then give yourself some time as well. You need to put a lot of effort, especially the first year, to develop all the teaching material, the courses, lectures, exams. So it's a lot of work. Perhaps that's not the time. Maybe you can wait for the second year when you have a little bit more space, because this really requires, it requires a different mindset. It's more of exploring and trying ideas. Teaching is conveying that. If you're lucky enough that you can combine these things and you can teach on the topics that you want to research, then that's actually much better, because you can read with students. You can just design a syllabus around the topic that you want to research, and you do that groundwork with students. So that's another thing to do if you have the opportunity to offer a course that aligns with your research interest. But I just want to emphasize that, yeah, it can be a lot of work.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of a balance there. Yeah.
Emmanuela, I think you all had your hands up for that as well, didn't you? Emmanuela, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll reiterate everything Julieta just said, but like time management, prioritization are key, and also self-motivation. So unlike with a PhD, with a fellowship, you're sort of expected to manage your own time and outputs with relatively little oversight. You usually do have a mentor or line manager, but that will support you, but you're essentially expected to be an independent researcher at this point. So I sort of use the same motivators I used during my PhD to apply external pressure. So I keep on top of like my outputs. For example, I'll propose conference papers or agree to publications so that I'm forced to meet these deadlines. And of course, these fall into my outputs, but they also create this, they kind of, instead of this macro 3-year time period, you kind of breaks it down into more micro manageable chunks, and it helps you prioritize your time. And yeah, so for example, my final output is hopefully a monograph, but in order to get to that, I will present at conferences and write an article here, and then it sort of forces me to be more productive on the day-to-day. And then again, while also thinking about networking and doing some teaching and academic service, and trying, as Julieta rightfully said, to integrate those into your research so they speak to each other rather than feeling like an extra thing that you have to do.
Yeah. Alecia-Jane, thanks.
Yeah, I'll just speak to the second part. So I think, you know, if you have if your PI has said, look, I think you're ready for this, then you just have to remind them that your success is their success. So that's something that's really important to say, look, if I go on and I put the effort into this, you know, I'm going to go on, and you can always say, you know, oh, this postdoc in my lab, they went on to become a group leader or whatever. So I just think, you know, it is nice to gently remind them of that, and also kind of also highlight that, you know, you can manage this on top of your current workload. It will require a bit of extra effort from your side to do that. It is a huge amount of work, but yeah, it's obviously totally worth it to get your dream job. So
yeah, great. Thanks. Ian.
Yeah, so I mean, I think a couple comments. So one is, I think it's important to keep in mind that we're presumably all here in academia because we're doing something that we really like, and that if you're working yourself to the point where you're you know, burning out, then, and it's not enjoyable anymore, then what are you doing, right? Like you find something else to do that brings you a little more joy if you're going to take this pay cut that you could get versus some other job. So for me, it was kind of, I didn't actually apply for like, you know, 5 different fellowships. I really just decided like the URF seems like the one that's going to be the most promising, looks the most sort of good for me personally. And so that's the one I applied for, and I decided not to apply for any others just because I didn't want to spend my whole year just applying for fellowships. And if I got that, great. If I didn't and ran out of funding and needed to go quit academia, also fine. So I think that for me personally just like made the whole experience a lot less stressful and kind of allowed me to refocus on the fact that like I'm doing this because it's fun and interesting and stimulating and not stressed too much.
Give you the tricks from that perspective. Thank you very much for that. And believe it or not, that has taken us through the full hour of our chat with you on fellowships. And I just want to say on behalf of everybody in the audience today and from the Career Service as well, an enormous thank you to all of our speakers, Julieta, Ian, Alecia-Jane, Emmanuela. It's been really amazing that all the things that you've shared, and that for us to be able to showcase your experiences like this is really helpful for people listening and learning. Sonali's put a survey in the chat. If everybody could take a few minutes to fill that in, that would be really helpful. I realized there were lots of questions that we didn't get through, but hopefully we've picked through some of that, and we will share some of our resources and other fellowship activities in an email after this. As I said, we have next Monday, we have another panel coming up where we have some senior academics coming to talk about their experience of reviewing fellowship applications. And Sonali's put a whole bunch of other things in there in the chat as well. That you can pick up. You can, of course, always book a one-to-one appointment. Feedback was definitely a theme that was coming through here as well. So you can also get feedback from careers consultants. Many schemes do require you to write for non-specialist readers, and we can give you feedback on your draft applications as well. So once again, thank you very much for all that amazing insight and tips. We will remember the taking the time, keeping that vision clear and showing what that narrative is, being brave, asking people for feedback and for their applications as well. All this fantastic nuggets of advice. So thank you all very much. And thanks to our participants.